Two brilliant climate researchers vanished without a trace in the frozen wilderness of northern Alaska. Their final radio message mentions strange voices beneath the glacier and lights moving under the ice. Days later, their camp is found abandoned, their data wiped, and their names carried by the wind. 7 years later, one of them reappears, barefoot, frostbitten, and claiming the other researcher is still there. Was it science, a cover-up, or something ancient waiting beneath the ice? Welcome to Last Clue, where every mystery hides a truth waiting to be uncovered. If you're drawn to dark mysteries and chilling disappearances, hit subscribe and like, because on Last Clue, the search for truth never ends. It began in northern Alaska, near the Kigluaik Mountains, a place so remote that even maps seem uncertain about its borders. Here, two researchers, Dr. Henry Cross and Dr. Melissa Crane, arrived to study something as fragile as it was terrifying, the rapid melt of the ancient ice. Both were respected climatologists, partners in work and in life, chasing what they called the truth beneath the thaw. They weren't thrill seekers or adventurers. They were scientists, grounded in data, discipline, and deadlines. But they were also human, and Alaska has a way of testing what that means. The village nearest to their base, a small Inupiaq settlement called Nuvik Point, had seen outsiders come and go for years. Oil surveyors, explorers, filmmakers, all searching for something the land didn't always want to give. The locals were polite to Henry and Melissa, but distant. They sold them supplies, warned them about thin ice and shifting winds, and told stories of lights beneath the glacier. The kind of stories city people dismiss as folklore. Henry had smiled at the tales, recording notes with quiet skepticism, while Melissa had written in her field journal, "They speak of the ice like it breathes." For weeks, their research went smoothly. They measured surface temperatures, mapped glacier retreat, and documented what they believed to be methane plumes rising from deep fissures below. But the deeper they went, the stranger the readings became. Their sensors picked up faint vibrations from beneath the glacier shelf, rhythmic, almost patterned, like a pulse. Henry logged the anomaly, noting that it repeated every few hours, but he didn't mention it to the university team back home. Melissa did, though, in a late-night email to her sister back in Oregon. "It feels alive here," she wrote, attaching a blurred photo of the ridge glowing faintly blue in the night. Her sister assumed it was an exposure error, a trick of light. Melissa never sent another message after that. The conditions were brutal, temperatures plunging below -40 degrees Fahrenheit, wind gusts sharp enough to strip exposed skin in seconds. Yet both researchers insisted on camping near the ice shelf instead of staying in the local housing offered by the village. Henry said it was to keep their equipment close. Melissa later told a villager it was because she couldn't sleep away from the glacier, that it made sounds when the wind died. Whispers, she called them. The villager told her it was the old frost, the kind that holds memories. In their recordings, later recovered by the search teams, you can hear it, faint, but there, a low hum that rises and fades like breath. It's unclear whether it's wind distortion or something else, but the tone of it feels wrong, too constant to be random. Henry labeled the file simply echo_05. It would be one of his last entries. By mid-October, their data logs show increasing irregularities. Sudden temperature spikes near fissures, melted channels that refroze within hours, instruments shutting off without explanation. The university in Anchorage requested they return by early November to deliver preliminary results, but Henry delayed, citing valuable anomalies. He believed they were on the verge of something big, evidence that could shift global climate models. He told a colleague over satellite call, "The glacier's changing faster than physics should allow." The locals had another explanation. They said the glacier had always lived, and sometimes it woke up angry. Hunters in Nuvik Point claimed to see blue lights moving beneath the ice late at night, slow and deliberate, like something aware. Dogs refused to travel that route, howling until turned back. The villagers said it had happened before, long ago, when another group of outsiders vanished near the same ridge. Their names, too, had been lost to the ice. Still, Henry and Melissa stayed. They were rational people, devoted to evidence, confident that the human mind can explain anything if it measures deeply enough. But beneath that confidence, the cold was already working its way in, not just into their tents and instruments, but into their minds. The Arctic can do that, unraveling people one quiet hour at a time. In late October, a storm rolled in from the north, burying the camp in white for nearly 3 days. When it cleared, their supply sleds were half buried, and several of their monitoring cables had snapped. They were effectively isolated 20 miles from the nearest settlement, with limited radio access. Yet according to Melissa's final field note, they refused to abandon the site. "We're not done," she wrote. "Something's beneath us. I can feel it." The last recorded video from their drone shows a sweeping shot of the glacier ridge, endless white fading into cloud. But if you slow the footage, just as the drone banks left, there's a flicker of movement, something dark under the ice, shifting like a shadow. The video cuts off abruptly. That was October 31st. 2 days later, they would both disappear. By early November, the glacier had become something else entirely, no longer just a field site, but a presence surrounding them, watching, almost breathing. The light there changed in strange ways, bending around the ice, tinting the snow in pale blue at hours when the sun shouldn't reach that far north. Melissa began sleeping less, claiming she heard faint knocking beneath the ground, like ice cracking from the inside. Henry blamed exhaustion, the wind, even the aurora activity. But his own notes betrayed him. His final audio log, recorded on November 1st, carries a tremor in his voice as he says, "There's sound coming from under the glacier." Repeating intervals. Not seismic. The next log was blank static. The villagers in Nuvik Point noticed the changes too. Supply requests from the camp grew erratic, then stopped altogether. One of the locals, a snowmobile driver named Arvik, later said he was hired to deliver extra fuel, but turned back halfway. His dogs refused to move closer. They whined, circled, then sat facing the ridge, ears low, as if waiting for something unseen. Arvik described the silence as too heavy to breathe. He returned without delivering the fuel. At the same time, weather reports from the region grew more chaotic. The forecast had predicted stable temperatures, but the sensors near the ridge showed drops of nearly 20 degrees overnight, followed by sudden rises, as if something under the glacier was radiating heat. Henry logged the readings obsessively, refusing to acknowledge that his instruments might be malfunctioning. "The ice is alive," Melissa had joked at first, but by the end of the week, neither of them was laughing. November 2nd was the night everything began to unravel. That evening, Melissa tried to send a radio transmission to the university. The line crackled, distorted by interference. In the recording later recovered from the base receiver, there's a faint echo in the background, a low tone repeating both their names. Not clearly, but enough that it's recognizable when the audio is slowed down. She asked Henry if he heard it too. He said it was signal bounce from the atmospheric shift. Yet his handwritten journal, found later near the camp, includes a single line scrawled in the margin, "The glacier watches." As night fell, the sky turned unnaturally bright, an aurora that pulsed instead of shimmered. Henry set up his camera to capture it, but halfway through the recording, the feed cut to static. Power surge, he thought. But Melissa noticed something else. The ice beneath their tent seemed to hum, vibrating at a frequency they could feel through their boots. When she stepped outside, she claimed the lights weren't just in the sky. They were beneath the ice too, faint blue shapes drifting upward, like shadows swimming in frozen glass. By midnight, the temperature had fallen far below forecast, 40 below zero, and dropping. Their generator stuttered, their heater failed, and still they didn't abandon camp. They had one working snowmobile, but leaving meant crossing unstable terrain in the dark. Henry believed it would pass. He was wrong. Around 1 a.m., Melissa's final entry was typed into her tablet. Voices under the ice. Lights moving. The timestamp was 1:03 a.m. The file ends mid-sentence. No further communications came from their coordinates. The following morning, at 7 a.m., when the university failed to receive their scheduled check-in, they attempted to reach the pair through radio and satellite. Both signals returned blank. A storm alert had been issued across the northern ridge, visibility reduced to near zero, winds exceeding 60 miles per hour. The research team assumed equipment failure, but locals knew better. They said the glacier was shifting, a sound like thunder rolling beneath the snow. Hunters refused to go near the site. Even the military weather station 30 miles south recorded unexplained magnetic interference at 1:15 a.m., aligning precisely with Melissa's last entry. In the days that followed, the village of Nuvik Point was wrapped in fear and superstition. People whispered about the lights, the sounds, the sudden drop in air temperature. Some said it was the ice breathing again, the same as years before when the old research team vanished. The local elders warned that something ancient moved when disturbed, a myth of the Yugraktak, those who breathe the frost. To outsiders it sounded like folklore, but to the villagers it was history. Meanwhile, Henry's last known location, logged by the drone's tracking beacon, placed him at the glacier's base near a fissure wide enough to swallow a truck. After that, nothing. No signal, no movement, just cold silence. When the Coast Guard's first rescue alert went out on November 4th, the coordinates were already buried under snow. In the recovered time-lapse footage from their camera, the final frame before darkness shows two figures standing at the ridge, their outlines barely visible in the white. Then a faint blue flare illuminates the scene from below, followed by static. Forensic analysts later said it was likely a lens malfunction or electrical discharge caused by cold. But others who saw the raw file claimed the light wasn't static. It moved, almost serpent-like, curling beneath the ice as if alive. By the time the storm cleared, their tent was gone. Only fragments remained, shredded fabric, broken instruments, a trail of footprints leading toward the fissure, then stopping abruptly where the glacier began. That was the last anyone saw of Dr. Henry Cross and Dr. Melissa Crane alive. The official report would call it equipment failure and exposure during severe weather. But those who heard the tapes, who saw the strange readings, and who still remember the way the ice glowed that night, knew better. Something else was waiting under that glacier, something older than science, colder than death, and very much awake. By November 3rd, the Arctic had gone silent again, a silence so absolute it pressed against the chest like a weight. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world erased. No tracks, no markers, no signs of life except the broken outline of a camp half buried in snow. When the first aerial search team arrived, they expected to find the two researchers waiting by their shelter, maybe frostbitten but alive. Instead, what they saw was chaos frozen in time. The tent was torn open from the inside, its poles bent outward as if something had forced its way out. Their equipment lay scattered across the ice, overturned cameras, shattered thermometers, and a laptop half crushed under a block of snow. The fabric of the tent was stained in patches of deep brown, frozen solid, later confirmed to be human blood. No footprints led away from the scene. Only a jagged path of drag marks that ended at the edge of the glacier fissure where the ice turned translucent and blue. The lead rescuer, a veteran mountaineer, later said the site felt wrong. Too still, too cold, as though even the wind refused to pass through. His team scanned the area for signs of an avalanche or collapse, but the surrounding snow was undisturbed. The only movement came from the faint shimmer beneath the glacier's surface, a slow ripple like something shifting deep below. When the Coast Guard arrived the next day, they expanded the search radius to 10 miles. Helicopters circled overhead, using heat sensors to detect body signatures. Nothing. The only warmth came from the generator still running at the edge of the camp, its fuel nearly depleted. That alone suggested the researchers had vanished suddenly, leaving everything behind mid-operation. Inside one of the weatherproof cases, a camera lens was found, cracked and partially encased in ice. Forensics later recovered partial footage from its memory card, but most of it was corrupted. Only the first 30 seconds remained intact, a shaky handheld view of the tent interior, shadows flickering across the walls, followed by a deep rumbling sound. Then a sudden flash of blue light, and a muffled scream that cuts off too abruptly to be human. The footage was never released to the public. Theories spread immediately. Some said the pair had fallen through a hidden crevasse, swallowed by the glacier's constant shifting. Others suggested hypothermia-induced disorientation, a state where people undress and flee into the cold, convinced they're overheating. But the evidence didn't match. Their thermal suits and gloves were still inside the tent, neatly folded, as if they'd been preparing to rest before something interrupted them. At the site's perimeter, investigators discovered a single line of boot prints leading toward the fissure, then stopping abruptly. It was as if the ice itself had consumed the rest. There were no signs of a cave-in, no broken edges, no visible entry point. Just clean, unbroken ice. A few feet from the prints lay the remains of their radio transmitter, its antenna twisted, wires fused together by some kind of extreme heat. Lab analysis would later note the metal had warped in a way consistent with electromagnetic discharge, not fire. Local volunteers joined the effort, scouring the ridge for any trace of movement. They found fragments of tent fabric blown miles away, and one of Melissa's research notebooks lodged between rocks. Most of the pages were blank, the ink frozen into unreadable streaks, except for one page where she had written 3 words repeatedly. "It's beneath us." By the 5th day, the operation shifted from rescue to recovery. The assumption was that both Henry and Melissa had succumbed to exposure, their bodies trapped somewhere within the glacier. Yet when divers attempted to drill into the fissure for search access, their instruments failed. Every attempt at penetration was met with equipment malfunction, freezing lubricant, or sudden structural collapse of the boreholes. It was as though the ice rejected intrusion. Then came the testimony that changed everything. One of the volunteers, a man named Rourke who had joined the second wave of the search, claimed to have heard something while working near the fissure. He said the air grew warmer, not colder, and that a sound began rising from below, a rhythmic vibration that turned into something like a chant. At first he thought it was wind resonance through the cracks, but as it grew louder, he realized it carried syllables. He could make out fragments of names, Henry's, Melissa's, repeated again and again until it faded into silence. Rourke quit the next day, refusing to return. His account was dismissed in the official report, labeled as stress-induced hallucination. By mid-November, the weather turned violent again, forcing the search to end prematurely. What remained of the camp was collected, cataloged, and sent to Anchorage. Among those items was a sealed data drive from Henry's equipment case. When analysts accessed it weeks later, they found dozens of encrypted files titled below_sequence. Most were empty placeholders. Only one contained audio, a 6-second recording of something heavy moving through water, followed by a faint exhale that doesn't match human respiration. The case, for the public at least, was over. The university issued a brief statement expressing condolences and citing the tragedy as an example of the unforgiving nature of field research in extreme environments. No memorial was held in Alaska. Instead, a small service took place at the university campus, where photos of Henry and Melissa were displayed beside a model of the glacier they had died studying. Yet within the search community, rumors persisted. One rescuer, under anonymity, claimed the glacier's surface near the fissure began to sink days after the storm, as if something beneath had shifted position. Another said that when they placed a motion sensor to monitor ice movement, it recorded faint vibrations between midnight and dawn, repeating in intervals every 90 minutes, a pattern too consistent to be random. The official cause of death would remain environmental exposure compounded by structural collapse. But no bodies were ever recovered. No trace of them was ever found, not even a fragment of bone or clothing. It was as though the glacier itself had swallowed them whole and sealed the wound behind them. Whatever happened on that ridge, it left behind no witness, no evidence that could be dissected or explained. Only the silence of the Arctic and the uneasy truth whispered among those who were there, that on the night of November 2nd, something beneath the ice had awakened, and Henry Cross and Melissa Crane had been the first to see it. The official investigation into the disappearance of Dr. Henry Cross and Dr. Melissa Crane began before the storm had even cleared. Within 48 hours of losing radio contact, the University of Anchorage contacted the Coast Guard, and a joint recovery mission was launched. What began as a routine search and rescue soon turned into one of the most confounding investigations in modern Arctic research history. Helicopters combed the region for days, following GPS coordinates and tracking beacons from the team's equipment. Yet every signal led to the same frozen expanse, a landscape indistinguishable from itself, where even footprints vanished within minutes. The Kigluaik Mountains were known for sudden storms, but this one had left something different behind, a stillness that defied weather. The snow appeared smoother than natural drift, almost as though it had been laid intentionally. Investigators began by reconstructing the final days of communication. Henry's last logged message to the university had been brief, reporting unusual glacial resonance and requesting an extension to collect further data. Melissa's final recorded contact was the corrupted radio call repeating both of their names through interference. Analysts at the Anchorage lab attempted to clean the audio, filtering layers of static and distortion. What emerged beneath the noise was unsettling. A faint undercurrent of low-frequency vibration, rhythmic, deliberate, like a breath. It pulsed throughout the recording at intervals too regular to be interference. As the Coast Guard expanded the search perimeter, they found fragments of metal strewn miles from the main site. Drone debris, carbon sensor casings, and a sample container partially melted on one side. The report noted that such deformation would require extreme heat, well beyond what the Arctic environment could produce. It was quietly filed as anomalous material stress. The following week, a forensic team was flown in from Fairbanks to collect environmental samples. They extracted cores of the glacier near the fissure, intending to study ice compression and trace evidence. Within the samples, they found microscopic iron particulates, oxidized, magnetic, and arranged in circular patterns. It was theorized that the field equipment might have malfunctioned, causing localized electrical surges. Yet the patterns were too uniform, too symmetrical, as if created by controlled vibration. When technicians attempted to replicate the effect using mechanical resonance, they couldn't reproduce it. Meanwhile, attention turned to the locals of Nuvik Point. Investigators interviewed villagers who had supplied the researchers in the weeks before they vanished. Every story echoed the same unease: the ice glowing at night, dogs refusing to cross the ridge, whispers in the wind. Though the accounts were dismissed publicly as folklore, internally, several officers noted striking consistencies between testimonies separated by decades. One elderly resident spoke of a breathing glacier that awakens every generation, consuming those who disturb it. The folklore, she said, was older than any modern settlement, told since her ancestors migrated north. The lead investigator noted the statement, but marked it irrelevant to the official case file. The investigation's next step was to access the encrypted data recovered from Henry's field drives. The files were labeled sequentially, below_sequence_01 through below_sequence_17, but only the first and the last opened. The first contained normal environmental readings. The last, recorded on November 2nd, contained a three-dimensional sonar scan of the glacier. The imaging revealed hollow voids deep beneath the ice, not geological cracks or air pockets, but cavities forming a structured pattern. They resembled tunnels. When the university lab attempted to recreate the scan, the data corrupted on transfer. The technician who viewed the original described it as architecture that shouldn't exist. Within days, the government stepped in. The National Snow and Ice Data Center assumed oversight, citing national environmental interest. Civilian access to the coordinates was restricted under the pretext of glacial instability. The Coast Guard's official statement listed both researchers as presumed deceased, lost to exposure and structural collapse. But internally, the case remained open, with a classified appendix labeled anomalous acoustic activity. Back at the university, faculty who had worked with Henry and Melissa began noticing irregularities. Their shared research page went offline, archived without explanation. Funding logs for the expedition disappeared from the grant database. When one of their graduate assistants attempted to retrieve backup files, the system returned a message reading "Access denied. Project reclassification under federal review." No such reclassification appeared in any public record. In January 2017, a private search team funded by Melissa's parents arrived in Alaska to conduct an independent investigation. They hired local guides and followed the GPS trail recorded in the rescue logs. The team found little but desolation. Yet near the ridge, one of the ground-penetrating radar units malfunctioned, displaying feedback loops that mimicked heartbeats. The guide, an experienced Alaskan tracker, described hearing faint sounds through the ice, not wind, but vibrations, deep and continuous. The team withdrew after only 2 days, citing unsafe terrain. When questioned months later, the lead private investigator described a detail not present in official reports. He claimed the fissure where the pair had vanished had closed entirely, the ice smooth and unbroken, with no visible evidence of the crack that had swallowed them. That was impossible under normal glacial movement, yet satellite imagery confirmed it. The fissure was gone. By mid-2017, the investigation's momentum had slowed. With no bodies, no conclusive evidence, and no new leads, the file was quietly downgraded to inactive. Still, within the small circle of those who had worked the case, unease lingered. Several reported nightmares after returning from the site, dreams of whispering winds that seemed to carry words they couldn't remember upon waking. One Coast Guard pilot refused to fly over the Kigluaik region again, claiming that his aircraft's instruments malfunctioned every time he did. 2 years later, in 2019, an anonymous source leaked fragments of the sealed investigation files to a regional journalist. Among them were high-resolution images from the recovered camera lens, showing what appeared to be a frozen wall of translucent ice. Behind it, faint shadows, humanoid in shape, pressed outward as if suspended mid-motion. The university denied the images' authenticity, dismissing them as manipulated. The journalist received a cease and desist order days later, and the article was never published. Inside law enforcement circles, whispers began to circulate about other disappearances. A pair of oil engineers missing from a survey near Nome in 2009. A geologist unaccounted for during an independent research trip in 1994. The common thread, all had reported interference in equipment and low-frequency vibrations before vanishing. None of those cases were ever formally linked to the Kigluaik incident, but the parallels were hard to ignore. In 2021, one of the original investigators, now retired, spoke off-record to a documentary team. He admitted that parts of the official report had been edited under instruction. When pressed, he said only this: the footage showed movement. Under the ice. Something large. It's not in the final file. He refused further comment. By 2023, the case had faded from public memory. The university purged most digital traces of the expedition, citing data redundancy. Yet for those who still lived in Nuvik Point, the memory hadn't faded. Every winter, when the temperature dropped low enough and the ice groaned under its own weight, villagers claimed to see faint blue lights near the ridge, not from above, but from within. When asked about it during a regional inquiry that same year, a local fisherman summed up what the official reports could not. They went looking for what melts the ice. But the ice was looking back. The file on Dr. Henry Cross and Dr. Melissa Crane was closed that spring. Cause of disappearance, unknown. Case status, presumed fatal. Public explanation, hypothermia and glacial collapse. But deep inside a government storage server, beneath redacted lines and sealed metadata, one phrase appeared at the bottom of the archived case notes. Further monitoring required. Subject: anomalies persistent. For most people, that would be the end of the story. For those who knew the Arctic secrets, it was only the beginning. The case remained cold, buried beneath bureaucracy and ice, until May 14, 2023, when a barefoot man stumbled into the small coastal settlement of Teller, Alaska. He was delirious, frostbitten, and barely able to speak, his skin patterned with strange, blistered burns shaped like rings. When he finally identified himself, the village medic froze. It was Dr. Henry Cross, missing for 7 years, presumed dead. News spread quickly, though not through official channels. Authorities arrived within hours, escorting Henry under armed supervision to a federal medical facility in Fairbanks. No public statement was made for 3 days. When it came, it was vague. A survivor of a long-term Arctic exposure incident has been recovered and is under observation. No mention of who, where, or how. But locals had seen his face. There was no doubt. Doctors described Henry's condition as impossible. Despite severe frostbite, his core body temperature was stable, and his blood showed abnormal oxygen retention, as though he had adapted to extreme hypothermia. His vocal cords were damaged, yet he whispered constantly, repeating fragments of sentences that made little sense. She's still there. The warmth. They made me choose. When he regained enough clarity to be questioned, his words deepened the mystery. He claimed Melissa was alive, beneath the glacier. He spoke of caverns, not natural ones, but constructed tunnels where he said they live. When asked who they were, Henry used a phrase from Inupiaq legend, Yugriktak, those who breathe the frost. He described them as a community that survived within the ice, feeding not on food but on warmth itself, drawn to heat and motion. He said they preserve the old gods, remnants of a world before the ice receded. According to Henry, he and Melissa had broken through into one of the caverns on November 2, 2016, after following the source of the strange blue lights. The descent revealed walls of translucent ice, layered like glass, glowing faintly from within. As they explored deeper, they felt vibrations underfoot, a rhythmic pulse echoing through the ice. Then, the lights moved, not reflections, but shapes shifting beneath the surface, watching them. He said Melissa panicked, the air growing thick and cold until the sound became a voice, whispering their names. When the ice opened, they were separated. Henry claimed he awoke later in a chamber of pale light, surrounded by figures half seen through frost. They didn't speak but communicated through the cold, draining his warmth with every breath. He said they offered him a choice, to remain frozen with them or to return and carry their warning. He chose to return, though it cost him years. Time, he said, did not move the same way beneath the ice. His story was dismissed as psychosis induced by trauma and prolonged isolation. Yet details he described matched anomalies from the 2016 investigation: the circular magnetic patterns, the rhythmic vibrations, the missing fissure. Even the burns on his skin resembled the symmetrical patterns found in the glacial core samples years before. When his parents arrived to see him, Henry refused contact, insisting they leave the lights off in the hospital room. He claimed they could see him through reflections. Over the following nights, staff reported unexplained drops in temperature near his ward. Surveillance cameras occasionally flickered, showing brief distortions like moving shadows. Then, one morning, Henry was gone. No sign of forced entry, no alarms. Only a faint layer of frost coating the window frame and a message traced in condensation. She's waiting. The disappearance reignited public interest, though official statements remained minimal. Theories multiplied, everything from government cover-ups to psychological collapse to paranormal intervention. But among researchers who'd studied his early work, another idea surfaced. Henry might have stumbled onto a geothermal anomaly capable of sustaining subglacial life. If true, it could explain the lights, the warmth loss, even the radiation-like burns. The implications for both science and secrecy would be immense. Melissa Crane's family, still holding vigils every November, demanded the case be reopened. The request was denied. The footage recovered in 2016 remained classified, and officials claimed all new evidence was unverified. But privately, an agent familiar with the file leaked one line from the 2023 reassessment. Subject demonstrated metabolic anomalies inconsistent with human physiology. Further containment advised. By autumn, Henry Cross was officially declared missing again, lost during transfer. Yet in the months following, reports emerged from isolated Alaskan villages of faint blue lights moving beneath the winter ice, sometimes near the same ridge where the researchers had vanished. Several claimed to hear whispers during snowstorms, voices calling familiar names. The final recorded sighting of anything connected to Henry came from a motion-triggered camera near the Kigluaik base campsite, set by a group of amateur explorers. The footage, grainy but clear enough, showed a lone figure walking barefoot across the snow before dawn. The man's breath fogged in the cold, but his body emitted no visible steam, as if the temperature around him was already below freezing. He walked toward the glacier's base, never looking back. Moments later, the camera lens iced over completely. Investigators reviewed the footage but found no trace of the figure afterward. The area where he walked was smooth, unbroken ice, no footprints, no trail, no disturbance. What began as a scientific expedition had become an unsolved cycle of vanishings and silence. Officially, there was no proof of subglacial life, no evidence of anything supernatural. Unofficially, those who had read the sealed files whispered that the glacier was never just ice. It was something older, conscious, and waiting. And whatever took Melissa Crane was not done watching. 7 years, 2 disappearances, and a trail of unanswered questions left buried beneath Alaskan ice. The official files on Project Kigluaik now sit locked inside a federal archive, sealed under environmental research protocols, though those who've seen them say they read more like classified defense reports than scientific logs. Henry Cross is gone, again. Melissa Crane remains missing, legally declared dead. The site where their camp once stood is now off limits, reclassified as a hazardous stability zone due to glacial fissure volatility. But locals know that's not why. Each winter, strange lights return beneath the ice near the same ridge, slow, deliberate movements like something alive beneath the frost. Satellite imaging shows brief temperature spikes in the same coordinates, as if pockets of unnatural heat pulsed deep below the surface before vanishing. Officials dismiss them as geothermal irregularities, yet no known vent system exists there. Families of the victims still hold out hope for a trace, a sign, anything. Melissa's parents, aging and frail, light candles every November 3rd, the day the expedition vanished. Her sister posts annual updates on missing persons forums, her words dwindling with each passing year. The Cross family withdrew from public view entirely after Henry's second disappearance. Their last statement simple: "We believe him." In 2024, an independent documentarian attempted to revisit the glacier, armed with drones and thermal scanners. He never made it past the second ridge. Severe weather rolled in from nowhere, a sudden whiteout despite calm forecasts. And when his team recovered the equipment days later, the drone footage ended abruptly with a burst of static and a single frame showing the faint outline of a figure standing within the ice wall. Authorities claimed it was pareidolia, the human brain seeing shapes where none exist. But the image, when enhanced, bore a striking resemblance to Melissa Crane's silhouette, her hand pressed against the frozen surface. Even now, researchers studying the surrounding terrain note unusual acoustic readings, low-frequency vibrations that seem to echo from below the glacier, rhythmic and almost mechanical. Some believe it's melting-induced stress fractures. Others suspect it's something older, deeper, perhaps biological. The truth remains sealed beneath the ice, untouchable and unwilling to be found. Locals in Teller and Nome have grown used to the stories, treating them as campfire tales for tourists. Yet behind closed doors, the fear lingers. Fishermen refuse to sail near the glacial runoff points after dark, claiming their sonar picks up moving shapes beneath the ice shelf. Hunters tell of hearing voices carried on the wind, whispers that seem to know their names. And each time someone vanishes in that region, a lost hiker, a stranded traveler, old rumors stir again. The university that sponsored the expedition quietly erased all trace of the project from its public database, though archival sleuths found remnants, a missing grant record, a deleted video file name, a reference to Subject Alpha. No footage ever surfaced, but those close to the case say the original tape showed something impossible, light moving in patterns too organized to be natural, shifting toward the camera just before the image cut to black. Now, almost a decade later, the glacier stands as both grave and monument, a silent expanse guarding what really happened beneath. The cold there feels different, heavier, as if the air remembers. Scientists who visit the area describe the same sensation, a subtle vibration underfoot, a pulse that seems to follow them. For most, the story of Dr. Henry Cross and Dr. Melissa Crane ends there, two brilliant minds lost to the Arctic void, victims of nature's brutality. But for those who've listened closely, who've studied the reports and watched the blue lights flicker under the winter sky, the ending feels less like closure and more like a warning. Because some mysteries don't end when the search does. They wait, beneath the surface, watching. The Arctic holds more than cold. It holds memory, frozen fragments of every story it refuses to release. The disappearance of Dr. Henry Cross and Dr. Melissa Crane reminds us that not all mysteries are buried by time. Some are buried by silence. Maybe what happened beneath that glacier was science gone wrong, or maybe it was something older than science itself. Either way, two people went searching for truth and found something that stared back. There's a fine line between discovery and danger, between curiosity and obsession. We build our understanding of the world by digging deeper, but how deep is too deep? What if some places are meant to stay untouched? What if the earth remembers those who don't listen? What do you think happened to them? Was it nature or something that defies it? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you believe their story deserves to be remembered, like, subscribe, and stay curious. Last Clue never stops searching.